The massive hall floated in space, made entirely of crystal that caught starlight from every direction. This wasn't just any meeting room. This was where the most powerful beings in the galaxy came to decide the fate of entire worlds. The walls showed holographic stars, thousands of them, each one marking a planet or system that the Galactic Council had conquered over the centuries. They glowed like trophies, cold and distant. Ambassador Michael Torres could barely stand. His whole body shook as he pressed his hands against the energy barrier that kept him trapped in the observer's section. The force field burned his skin, but he didn't care. He couldn't care. Not when his daughter was kneeling in the center of that terrible circle, waiting for judgment. Her name was Emma. Just 19 years old, barely out of her teenage years. 3 months ago, she had been so excited about getting accepted into the Xenobiology Fellowship program. She wanted to study alien life forms, to understand different cultures across the galaxy. Michael remembered driving her to the spaceport, how she'd bounced in her seat talking about all the amazing things she would learn. Now she knelt on cold metal, surrounded by beings who saw humans as nothing more than primitive animals. The whole thing was insane. Emma's crime? She had touched a rock. That was it. During a routine visit to document Vorthack culture, she had reached out and placed her hand on what they called a memory stone. It was beautiful, she told him later during their last call, swirling with colors that seemed to move like liquid. She was a scientist. Of course she wanted to touch it, to understand it. But when her fingers made contact, the stone had done something it hadn't done in 10,000 years. It had glowed. Bright white light had poured from it, filling the entire Vorthack temple. The Vorthack had gone crazy. They screamed about defilement, about contamination. They said her primitive human brain had somehow corrupted their sacred relic. Within hours, Emma had been arrested, dragged before the council, and now here they were. The Vorthack Supermarch stood at the podium like some nightmare made real. It had 4 arms that moved in strange patterns as it spoke, each gesture meaning something in their ancient religion. Its voice boomed across the chamber, translated by technology but still alien, still wrong. This human juvenile has committed the ultimate sin. She has contaminated a sacred relic of the Vorthack people with her inferior neural emanations. Her primitive mind has touched what should never be touched. Michael wanted to scream. Primitive? Humans had split the atom, cured diseases, created art that could make you weep. They had love, compassion, dreams. But to these creatures, none of that mattered. Humans were new to space travel, only discovering faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. To species that had been traveling the stars for millions of years, humans were babies. Worse than babies. Insects. The sentence, the Supermarch continued, its voice growing louder, is final consumption by the Devourer. Those words hit Michael like a physical blow. The Devourer. Everyone knew about the Council's pet monster. It was their favorite form of execution, saved for those they wanted to make examples of. The creature would eat its victims slowly, keeping them alive as long as possible. But worse than that, it had special abilities. The thing could pull memories from its prey, extract every thought and feeling and experience. The Council would then store these memories in their vast archives, like collecting butterflies in a case. Please? Michael shouted, his voice breaking. She's just a child. She didn't know your rules. She didn't mean any harm. Another council member turned to look at him. This one was called Thektar, an insect-like being with a face covered in hard shell. Its eyes were black and empty as it spoke. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. Your species was warned when you joined the galactic community. You were told to respect your superiors. This girl's death will remind all humans of their place. Michael felt his knees go weak. They weren't even pretending this was about justice. This was about power. About keeping humans scared and obedient. About showing a billion worlds what happened when lesser species forgot they were lesser. But then Emma lifted her head and Michael's heart broke completely. She looked right at him, her brown eyes calm and steady. No tears. No shaking. She even smiled, that same crooked little smile she'd had since she was a kid. The one she gave him when she fell off her bike at 5. The one she showed when she broke her arm at 7 trying to climb the oak tree in their backyard because she wanted to see if birds' eggs were really blue. The smile that said everything would be okay even when it wouldn't. Her lips moved silently, but he could read them clearly. It's okay, Dad. How could she be so brave? How could his little girl, who used to be scared of thunderstorms, face death with more courage than he'd ever seen? Michael wanted to tear down the barriers, to fight every alien in this room to save her somehow. But he was just one man, and this was the heart of the Council's power. There was nothing he could do except watch. The execution platform began to rise from the floor. It moved smoothly, perfectly engineered like everything the council made. On it appeared the ceremonial blade, except it wasn't really a blade at all. It was made of pure energy that existed in 7 dimensions at once, whatever that meant. To human eyes, it looked like a tear in space itself, sharp enough to cut through anything, even reality. The council members leaned forward in their seats. This was entertainment for them. They would broadcast Emma's death across their empire, to 1,000 conquered worlds. Every species under their rule would see what happened to those who broke their laws. It would be a lesson written in human blood. Michael pressed harder against the barrier, not caring that his hands were now bleeding from the burns. Emma, I love you. She heard him. He saw it in the way her smile grew just a little wider. She nodded once, so small that probably only he noticed. Then she closed her eyes and waited. The blade began to descend. The air itself seemed to scream as it moved, reality bending around its impossible edge. Time seemed to slow down. Michael could see every detail. The way Emma's hair fell across her shoulders, the tiny scar on her chin from when she was 8, the way her hands stayed steady even now. The blade fell with a sound like the universe tearing in half. The execution was complete. The Galactic Council had just killed a 19-year-old girl for touching a rock, and they called it justice. The feeding chamber looked like something from a nightmare. The walls were alive, actually alive, made from some horrible mix of grown bone and alien technology. Veins as thick as tree branches ran through them, pulsing with glowing fluid that fed the monster waiting in the center. The whole place smelled wrong, like metal and meat and something else that human noses weren't meant to detect. In the middle of this horror sat the Devourer. There was no good way to describe this thing. Imagine a dragon, but wrong. 30 feet long, covered in scales that couldn't decide what they wanted to be. One moment they looked solid like armor, the next they turned into flowing plasma, like living lava. The creature had been designed by the Galactic Council's best scientists, built for one purpose, to be the perfect killing machine. Not just to kill, but to feast on memories, to steal everything a person ever was before destroying them completely. Robert Davidson stood at his monitoring station, his hands shaking as he gripped the console. He was one of only a handful of humans allowed to work in the Council's towers, chosen because he was smart enough to be useful but weak enough to never be a threat. They paid him well, kept his family safe back on Earth. In exchange, he helped them run their machines, including monitoring the Devourer during feedings. Today was different. Today they were feeding it Katie. He'd known her since she was 12 years old. Such a bright kid, always asking questions about everything. When she was 15, she'd come to him asking about colleges that offered xenobiology programs. He'd helped her with her applications, wrote her recommendation letters. He'd been so proud when she got into the fellowship program. Now he watched through reinforced glass as guards carried in what remained of her. The feeding platform rose from the floor. The guards placed their terrible cargo on it with the same care they'd use for delivering groceries. To them this was routine. Just another execution, another meal for their pet monster. They left quickly, probably eager to get away from what came next. The Devourer stirred. It had been sleeping, or at least pretending to sleep. These things were smarter than regular animals, but not quite intelligent enough to be called sentient. At least that's what everyone believed. The creature lifted its massive head, nostrils flaring as it sensed the offering. From the crown of its head, tentacles began to emerge. No, not tentacles, neural tendrils, the council called them. They looked like fiber optic cables made of flesh, glowing with soft blue light from within. Hundreds of them, each one thinner than a pencil but stronger than steel. This was the really sick part. The Devourer didn't just eat its victims. These tendrils would connect to the neural tissue, download everything, every memory, every thought, every dream the person ever had. The council kept these memories in massive archives, like some twisted library of the dead. Robert forced himself to watch as the tendrils reached toward Katie's remains. This was his job. Monitor the feeding, record the data, make sure everything went according to plan. He owed her that much, to be a witness, to remember her when everyone else forgot. The tendrils made contact. What happened next was impossible. The Devourer's roar was unlike anything Robert had ever heard. It wasn't just loud, it was wrong, like reality itself was screaming. The reinforced observation windows, designed to withstand meteor impacts, shattered like cheap glass. Robert threw himself under his desk as fragments rained down. "What's happening?" Jennifer Price, his assistant, shouted over the noise. She was at her station, fingers dancing over holographic displays that were going crazy. Neural feedback is off the charts. 300% above baseline. Robert pulled himself up, ignoring the cuts from the glass. The monitors were showing impossible readings. The Devourer's neural activity was spiking in patterns that shouldn't exist. That's not possible. The suppressors should prevent any feedback over 50%. 400%. Jennifer's voice was rising in panic. 500. 600. Sir, these machines must be broken. Nothing alive can generate these readings. But the machines weren't broken. Robert could see the Devourer through the broken window, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The creature's body was convulsing, muscles rippling under its scales in ways that defied its engineered anatomy. It looked like something was trying to burst out from inside it. Where the neural tendrils touched Katie's remains, light was spreading. But this wasn't the cold, blue light of Council technology. This was something else, warm, golden, chaotic. It pulsed like a heartbeat, spreading up the tendrils and into the Devourer's body. The creature thrashed, its tail smashing into the walls, leaving deep gouges in the living bone. Shut it down, Robert ordered. Cut the neural connection. I can't. Jennifer was practically screaming now. The system's not responding. It's like something else is controlling it. The Devourer's eyes snapped open. Each eye was as big as a dinner plate, usually dull yellow like a reptile's. But now they were different. They were focused, aware, intelligent in a way that made Robert's skin crawl. This wasn't the look of an animal anymore. This was something with consciousness, with purpose. The creature's mouth opened. Robert expected another roar, maybe fire if the stories about its abilities were true. Instead, something impossible happened. Words came out. Human words. Katie's voice, but not just hers. It was like 100 versions of her were speaking at once, harmonizing with themselves in ways that human throats could never achieve. You never asked the right question, the voices said. They were calm, almost amused, coming from the throat of a monster that had just consumed a 19-year-old girl. You spent so much time asking what makes humans special. You should have asked what makes us unstoppable. Robert felt his knees go weak. In all his years working here, monitoring hundreds of feedings, nothing like this had ever happened. The Devourer had consumed members of dozens of species, some far more advanced than humans. It had never spoken. Never shown any sign of taking on the consciousness of its meals. Sir, Jennifer whispered, her voice trembling. The neural patterns, they're not being absorbed into the archives. They're overriding the Devourer's consciousness. Katie's memories aren't being stored. They're taking over. Robert looked at the monitors again and his heart nearly stopped. She was right. The data stream showed human neural patterns spreading through the Devourer's brain like a virus, replacing its engineered thoughts with something entirely different. Katie wasn't being digested. She was conquering the creature from the inside out. The golden light grew brighter, and the Devourer's roars turned into something else. Laughter. Human laughter, coming from a throat that was never meant to make that sound. The creature's body continued to change, scales flickering between states of matter faster and faster, as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be anymore. My God, Robert breathed, watching as humanity's greatest weakness, their supposed primitive nature, turned into their greatest strength. What have they done? The Devourer, or whatever it was becoming, turned those intelligent eyes toward the observation deck. When it spoke again, Robert could swear he heard Katie's personality in the words, her curiosity, her determination, her refusal to give up even in death. We don't die, the voices said. We transform. And now, thanks to your council's arrogance, we're about to transform everything. The change began where the neural tendrils touched Katie's remains, spreading through the Devourer's body like fire through dry grass. But this wasn't destruction. It was something else entirely. The creature's neck started to bulge and twist in ways that should have torn it apart. Its scales, those perfect weapons engineered by the Council's scientists, began falling off like autumn leaves, clattering to the floor with metallic sounds. What lay beneath those scales should not have been possible. It was skin, human skin, but not just from one person. The flesh seemed to ripple and flow, constantly changing, as if thousands of different human bodies were trying to exist in the same space at the same time. Then the faces started to appear. They pushed up from under the creature's skin like swimmers breaking through the surface of a pool. A man's face here, a woman's there. Children, teenagers, elderly people, hundreds, then thousands of human faces emerging along the Devourer's spine. They would surface for a moment, mouths moving as if trying to speak, then sink back down into the flesh only to be replaced by others. Ambassador Michael Torres had been dragged back to the main chamber to witness what his daughter had become. The moment he saw those faces, his legs gave out completely. He crashed to his knees on the cold metal floor, his mouth hanging open in shock, because he recognized some of them. That was impossible, but he knew what he was seeing. "Grandfather?" he whispered, staring at one particular face that had emerged near the creature's shoulder. It was his grandfather, Paul Torres, who had died 30 years ago in the First Contact Wars when humans had initially encountered the Council's forces. The old man's face was exactly as Michael remembered it, down to the scar on his left cheek from a farming accident. Another face surfaced nearby, a young woman with short black hair. Michael knew her too. Lisa Park, one of the colonists from New Tokyo. That entire colony had been destroyed by the Council 20 years ago as punishment for refusing to pay tribute. 3,000 humans had died that day. And now Lisa was here, her face emerging from this impossible creature. They were all here. Every human who had ever died in Council space, every person killed by their laws or their wars, every man, woman and child who had perished under their rule. They hadn't gone to whatever afterlife awaited humans. They had been waiting, gathering, preparing for this moment. Immediate containment protocols. Counselor Thektar's voice cut through the chaos. The insect-like alien's usual calm had shattered completely. Its four arms waved frantically as it shouted orders. Activate the null fields. Maximum power. Destroy that thing before it spreads. The Council's emergency systems kicked in. Force fields snapped into existence around the transformed creature. These weren't ordinary barriers. Null fields were designed to stop anything, even nuclear explosions. The air itself turned solid around the devourer, trying to crush it out of existence. But it was already too late. The creature stood up, and its very existence was wrong. Its legs were both reptilian and human at the same time, covered in scales that were also skin, jointed in ways that followed both alien and human anatomy simultaneously. Looking at it hurt the brain like trying to see two different pictures in the same space. The monster that had been the devourer was becoming something that shouldn't be able to exist, a living contradiction. Where the creature's chest should have been, where it had swallowed Katie's remains, her face now pushed through the flesh. Not a copy, not an impression. It was her, but transformed. Her eyes opened, and they blazed with a light that came from somewhere beyond the physical world. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of billions. "Every human who dies doesn't end," Katie said, but it was more than just her speaking. Michael could hear echoes of every human who had ever lived, a chorus stretching back to the first humans who had looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. Death is just a doorway for us. We join the substrate, the quantum consciousness that connects all human minds across space and time. We've always been connected, all of us, through something you could never understand because you gave it up millions of years ago. The council members were backing away now, their composure completely shattered. These were beings who had ruled the galaxy for eons, who had never known fear or doubt. Now they scrambled over each other trying to get away from what they had created. "You thought you were feeding your pet," Katie continued, her voice growing stronger. More faces emerged from the creature's body as she spoke, all of them talking in perfect unison. "But you were giving us a door. A way in. Every human your beast consumed, every consciousness it tried to digest, we were all waiting on the other side. Waiting for enough of us to gather, waiting for the right moment. You wanted to make an example of me? Congratulations. You've just given humanity the key to everything." The creature's form kept shifting, becoming less stable with each passing second. Reality itself seemed to bend around it. The gravity in the chamber started fluctuating. One moment everyone was pressed to the floor, the next they were floating. The walls began showing colors that humans didn't have names for, shades that existed in spectrums the human eye shouldn't be able to see. The Council's translation devices went haywire. Instead of converting alien languages into something each species could understand, they started spouting random words from across history. Ancient Latin mixed with languages that wouldn't exist for another 1,000 years. Binary code merged with poetry. Mathematical equations became love songs. Robert Davidson, still at his monitoring station, watched his screens in complete awe. The data flowing across them didn't make sense according to any science he knew. "This is impossible," he breathed, but he couldn't deny what he was seeing. Human neural patterns aren't just taking over the devourer. They're rewriting the quantum signature of space itself. They're changing the fundamental laws of physics in this area. His assistant, Jennifer, stood beside him with tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling, a mix of terror and joy that perfectly captured the moment. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's terrifying. Robert, it's us. All of us. Every human who ever lived, ever dreamed, ever loved. We're all connected. We've always been connected." The transformed creature took a step forward, and the null fields shattered like glass. The Council's ultimate containment system, designed to hold back the most dangerous forces in the universe, couldn't stop what humanity had become. Because this wasn't just power, this was existence itself refusing to follow the rules. Katie's face, still emerging from the creature's chest, turned toward her father. Michael Torres saw his daughter in those blazing eyes, but also so much more. He saw his grandfather, his mother who had died when he was young, friends he had lost, strangers he had never met. All of humanity, looking back at him through his little girl's eyes. "Dad," she said, and for a moment it was just her voice, just his Katie. "We're not gone. We never were. We were just waiting for you to find us." The transformation accelerated. The creature that had been the devourer was becoming something beyond description, beyond understanding. It was humanity's greatest secret revealed. That death was not the end for them, that every human consciousness was part of something larger, something that had been growing and waiting since the species first developed self-awareness. The Galactic Council had thought they were executing a young woman to make a point about power. Instead, they had opened a door they could never close, releasing something that would change the galaxy forever. Because humans didn't die like other species. They transformed, they merged, they became part of something greater. And now that something greater was free. The warning sirens had been screaming for 10 minutes straight, their piercing wails echoing through every corridor of the massive council station. Red lights flashed on every wall, emergency protocols activated across all sectors. But nobody was responding to the alarms anymore. They couldn't. They were all frozen, staring at the nearest screen, neural interface or communication device, watching something that shouldn't be possible. Every single display in the station, from the massive view screens in the command center to the tiny personal devices carried by workers, was showing the same thing. Human memories flooding out like a broken dam. A child's first day of school. An old woman baking bread. A teenager's first kiss. A father teaching his son to ride a bike. A mother singing her baby to sleep. Thousands, millions, billions of human experiences, pouring through every electronic system the Council controlled. But it wasn't just the memories. It was the emotions that came with them, raw and unfiltered. Species that had spent millions of years evolving past feelings, that had bred out emotion in favor of cold logic, were suddenly drowning in human experiences. In Maintenance Corridor 7, a Vorthack technician named Zekval suddenly collapsed against the wall. The four-armed alien was shaking, its breathing rapid and uneven. It had just experienced something its species had eliminated from their genetic code 3 million years ago, a mother's love for her child. The sensation hit like a sledgehammer. Warm, overwhelming, all-consuming protective instinct that made everything else seem insignificant. Zekval had no context for this feeling, no defense against it. The technician curled into a ball on the floor, making sounds its species hadn't made since before they conquered their first star system. 2 levels up, a Zentari warrior stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, tears streaming down its reptilian face. The 7-foot-tall soldier, trained from birth to feel nothing but the joy of victory and the hunger for battle, was staring at a child's crayon drawing being displayed on the wall screen. It was simple, just a yellow circle for the sun, blue scribbles for sky, a house that was basically a square with a triangle on top. Stick figures of a family holding hands. The warrior couldn't understand why this crude image was destroying him. His species created art with mathematical precision, perfect in every way. This human child's drawing was messy, the lines didn't even stay within boundaries, the proportions were all wrong. But something about it, something about the pure joy and innocence in those chaotic crayon strokes, reached into the warrior's chest and squeezed. He had killed thousands in battle without blinking. Now he sobbed like a hatchling over a child's drawing of home. The entity that had been the devourer moved through the station like a ghost made real. Walls meant nothing to it anymore. It simply walked through them as if they were made of mist, leaving ripples in reality where it passed. The creature, though calling it a creature seemed wrong now, was changing everything it touched. The sterile white corridors that the Council preferred, clean and perfect and lifeless, exploded with human expression. Paint appeared on the walls but not random splashes. Murals bloomed into existence. The Sistine Chapel ceiling here, street art from old Earth there. A child's finger painting next to the Mona Lisa. Gang tags beside Shakespeare's sonnets. The walls became a canvas for 10,000 years of human creativity. Mathematical equations appeared in glowing script, Einstein's theory of relativity, a third grader's first algebra homework, shopping lists calculating if someone had enough money for milk and eggs. Love letters in 100 languages spread across the ceiling. Suicide notes appeared and faded, their pain and despair making alien readers stumble. Grocery lists, birthday cards, angry text messages sent at 2 in the morning. The entire messy, chaotic, beautiful spectrum of human existence painted itself across the council's perfect order. Ambassador Michael Torres stood in the main chamber, unable to move as his daughter's face turned toward him. The entity's body was constantly shifting now, thousands of human forms flowing in and out of existence, but Katie's face remained constant in what had been the creature's chest. "Dad," she said, and her voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It echoed from the walls, whispered from the air itself, thrummed through the floor. They never understood. The council, all these advanced species, they thought feeling nothing made them strong. They thought order and logic and control were evolution. But they threw away the very thing that makes consciousness worth having. Michael wanted to respond, but his throat was too tight with emotion. His little girl was speaking with the wisdom of billions, transformed into something beyond human but still essentially his daughter. "Humans don't die, Dad. We just change states. Every human who ever lived is here with me now. Grandpa says hi, by the way. So does Mom." Michael's knees buckled. His wife had died giving birth to Katie, something he'd never fully recovered from. To know she was there, somehow, in this impossible entity his daughter had become. "Every human who ever wondered what was beyond the stars," Katie continued, "everyone who ever loved or lost or dreamed or failed, we're all connected. We always have been. Death just brings us closer to the truth. And now that truth is free." Across the galaxy, the Council's iron grip was falling apart. Their massive fleet, the most powerful military force ever assembled, was turning on itself. Not in violence, but in something far more destructive to their order: doubt. Admiral James Knox stood on the bridge of the human fleet's flagship, watching tactical displays that made no sense. The Council's armada, 10,000 ships strong, was falling apart without a single shot being fired. His crew was picking up transmissions from across the enemy fleet, and what they heard was impossible. "Admiral," his communications officer, Lieutenant William Grant, looked up from his console with wide eyes. "Sir, we're receiving surrender signals from 70% of the Council fleet. But the rest, sir, you need to hear this." Grant activated the speakers and the bridge was filled with music. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy, was being broadcast from hundreds of Council warships. But as Knox listened, he heard something else underneath the music. Voices. Alien voices, singing along in languages never meant to carry melody. They didn't know the words, probably didn't even understand what the song meant. But they were trying, fumbling through the notes, because something in that human music had awakened feelings they didn't know they could have. Knox laughed. He couldn't help it. The absurdity, the beauty, the perfect justice of it all. The most powerful military force in the galaxy, brought to its knees not by weapons or tactics, but by a symphony written by a deaf human hundreds of years ago. "Sir?" Grant looked concerned. "Your orders?" "Orders?" Knox wiped tears from his eyes, not sure if he was laughing or crying anymore. "Lieutenant, the war's over. It ended the moment those poor bastards learned what it means to feel. Send medical teams to any Council ship that requests aid. Something tells me they're going to need help processing what's happening to them." On the Council station, chaos and transformation spread like a virus. A group of Threnari scientists stood in their laboratory, staring at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. They had just experienced the human memory of holding a newborn baby, felt that overwhelming mix of joy and terror and love that came with bringing life into the world. Their species reproduced through cloning, efficient and emotionless. They had no context for what they were feeling, but they couldn't stop crying. In the Council's throne room, the mighty rulers of the galaxy huddled together like frightened children. These beings who had conquered thousands of worlds, who had ruled for millions of years, were being undone by finger paintings and folk songs, by the memory of a first kiss and the pain of a broken heart. The revolution wasn't violent. There were no explosions, no dramatic battles, no heroic last stands. It was quieter than that and far more complete. It was the galaxy learning to feel again, one memory at a time. It was order giving way to chaos, logic yielding to love, control surrendering to the beautiful mess of existence. The entity continued to move through the station, leaving transformation in its wake. And Katie's voice, merged with billions of others, spoke a simple truth that changed everything. You thought you were evolving past emotion. But feeling is what makes us real. Love, loss, joy, pain, that's not weakness. That's the point of being alive. 3 days had passed since the execution that changed everything. The Galactic Council's grand governing chamber, once filled with hundreds of representatives from conquered worlds, now stood almost completely empty. The throne-like seats where the galaxy's rulers had sat for millions of years were abandoned. Most of the council members had fled, running from something they couldn't fight, couldn't understand, couldn't control. Only two figures remained in that massive hall. One was the entity that had once been the Devourer. It was impossible to describe what it had become. Its form shifted constantly. One moment it looked almost human, the next it was pure light, then something in between that hurt to look at directly. Millions of human faces flowed across its surface like clouds across the sky. Men, women, children, all the humans who had ever lived and died among the stars. They appeared and disappeared, each one smiling as if they were finally free. The other figure was ancient beyond measure. The curator, they called it. Nobody knew what species it had originally been. It had modified itself so many times over the eons that it was now something unique. It had watched civilizations rise from mud huts to starships. It had seen empires span galaxies only to crumble to dust. In all its millions of years of existence, it had never seen anything like this. "You have destroyed everything we built," the curator said. Its voice wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was genuinely curious, like a scientist observing an unexpected result. Millions of years of order, of logic, of peace maintained through control and careful management. Katie's face emerged from the constantly shifting form of the entity, becoming clear among the thousands of others. She was smiling, but it wasn't a cruel smile. It was the smile of someone who had figured out a secret that everyone else had missed. "We didn't destroy anything," she said, her voice carrying the echo of billions. "We transformed it. Yes, you had peace. But what kind of peace was it? Your worlds were quiet because no one was allowed to speak. Your people were calm because they'd forgotten how to feel. You had the peace of a graveyard, everything silent, everything still, everything dead inside. We're not offering you peace. We're offering you life." The curator tilted its head, processing this. "Life is chaos. Life is pain. Life is conflict." "Yes," Katie agreed simply. "And life is also joy. Life is love. Life is the surprise of something unexpected. When was the last time anything surprised you? When was the last time something in this galaxy wasn't perfectly controlled, perfectly predicted?" The curator had no answer. Across the galaxy, the transformation was spreading faster than anyone could track. Every world touched by the council was waking up, as if from a long, cold sleep. On the mining world of Kepler 442, something extraordinary was happening. The Thurian workers had been genetically modified over thousands of years to be perfect laborers. They didn't need rest, didn't feel pain, didn't think beyond their assigned tasks. They had worked in the deep mines for generations, silent as machines, efficient as robots. But now, echoing up from the deepest shafts, came something that hadn't been heard on that world in 10,000 years. Singing. The Thurians were singing. They didn't know the words. It was an old human mining song that had somehow found its way into their newly awakened consciousness. The melody was rough, off and off-key, but it was theirs. For the first time in their species' history, they were creating something not because they were ordered to, but because they wanted to. Because it felt good. Because being alive meant more than just existing. On the academic planet of Skolara, the greatest minds in the galaxy were having mental breakdowns, the good kind. These were beings who had devoted themselves to pure knowledge, to facts and figures stripped of all emotion. They studied the universe like it was a mathematical equation to be solved. Now they understood what human scientists had always known, that the best discoveries came not from cold logic but from passion. From the desperate need to understand. From love of the subject. A physicist who had spent 3 centuries studying stellar formation suddenly realized she thought stars were beautiful. A biologist who had cataloged millions of species without a second thought now understood why humans gave animals names and treated them like family. They were learning that knowledge without feeling was just data. But knowledge with passion? That was wisdom. Ambassador Michael Torres stood in what had once been the council's throne room, trying to process what he was seeing. The space had been transformed completely. The cold metal walls were now covered in art from across human history, cave paintings next to Renaissance masterpieces, children's crayon drawings given the same importance as the Mona Lisa. The ceiling showed the night sky, but not the clinical star charts the council preferred. This was the night sky as humans saw it, full of wonder, full of stories, constellations traced by imagination rather than science. It was, he realized, like someone had merged humanity's greatest cathedral with a kindergarten classroom. Beautiful and messy, profound and silly, sacred and playful all at once. It was perfectly, chaotically human. "Katie," he called out, not sure where to direct his voice. "Katie, are you still, you? Are you still my little girl?" The answer came from everywhere at once. From the walls, from the air, from the light streaming through the windows. It was Katie's voice, but also more than that. It was every human voice, all speaking as one. I'm still me, Dad. I'm still the girl who broke her arm falling from the oak tree. I'm still the one who stayed up all night to watch the meteor shower with you when I was 10. But I'm also more now. I'm Tommy, who died in the Mars Rebellion fighting for freedom. I'm Jessica, who was killed in First Contact trying to make peace. I'm every human who ever looked at the stars and dared to dream we could touch them. We're all here, Dad. We're all free. Michael felt tears running down his face. I miss you. I'm not gone. None of us are gone. We're just bigger now. We're everywhere. The entity began to change again, its form becoming less solid, more dispersed. It wasn't dying, it was spreading. The massive creature broke apart into countless points of light, each one a tiny star carrying human consciousness, human memories, human dreams. What's happening? The curator asked, watching the dispersal with its ancient eyes. We're spreading, Katie's voice explained, growing fainter but somehow also more present. Every point of light will find a world, a species, a corner of the galaxy that's forgotten how to feel. We'll remind them. Not by force, not by control, but by example. By showing them what they're missing. The lights began to fly away, passing through the walls as if they weren't there, heading out into the galaxy. Each one carried a piece of humanity's collective soul. Where they landed, things would change. A warlike species might remember what it was like to love. A cold, logical race might rediscover laughter. A world that had forgotten music might suddenly find its people humming songs they didn't know they knew. The curator watched this dispersal with something that, in any other being, might have been called awe. What happens now? Without the Council's order, without control, what becomes of the galaxy? Michael Torres found himself answering, speaking not just for himself but for his daughter, for humanity, for billions of souls past and present. Now the galaxy learns what we've always known. That life isn't about perfection. It's not about order or control or everything going according to plan. Life is about the beautiful mess in between. It's about falling down and getting back up. It's about loving someone and losing them and finding the courage to love again. It's about bad jokes and burnt dinners and songs sung off-key. It's about trying and failing and trying again. He paused, watching the last of the lights disappear into the darkness between stars. You had a galaxy that ran like a machine. Perfect, efficient, cold. We're giving you a galaxy that lives like a heart. Messy, unpredictable, but warm. Alive. The last of the entity dispersed, but Katie's voice lingered for one final moment, carried on the air like a whisper and a shout all at once. They thought executing one human girl would break us. They thought death was the end. They never realized, you can't kill what refuses to die. You can't silence what lives in every story told around a campfire, every song hummed in the shower, every dream shared between friends. Humanity isn't just a species. It's an idea. And ideas? Ideas are immortal. The throne room fell silent, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of the Council's rule. It was the quiet of a universe holding its breath before something new begins. Across the galaxy, on a million worlds, beings who had forgotten how to feel were remembering. They were laughing, crying, singing, dancing, living for the first time in eons. The cold efficiency of the Council's rule was ending, replaced by something messier, louder, more chaotic, and infinitely more alive. In the space between stars, in that place where physics met philosophy, where consciousness touched the infinite, Katie Torres danced with every human who had ever lived. Their combined spirits spread through the cosmos like seeds on the wind, ensuring that wherever life existed in the universe, it would never again forget what it truly meant to live. The galaxy would never be the same. It would be better. It would be worse. It would be complicated and difficult and wonderful and terrible. It would be human.